So welcome everybody. My name's Cindy. I think I've met most of you here tonight. Thank you guys for coming. We're very excited to have our very first event at the Museum of Natural History here. And I will introduce the Senior Director of the Center for Lifelong Learning here, Ruth Cohen, and she will walk you through the program tonight. And, we have a lot of great programming here for you, a lot of resources from the museum to offer, including a hackathon this weekend, Hack the Universe, and also BridgeUp program, which Christina will also talk about. So anyway, enjoy, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit later tonight.
Thanks, Cindy. Good evening, everyone. As Cindy said, I'm Ruth Cohen. I'm the Director of the Center for Lifelong Learning here at the museum, which means once we have you, we never let you go. Be warned. So we are thrilled to host you. When we learned of the goals of CSNYC, we immediately wanted to partner. We share those goals, and we are activating them in a program that Christina will talk to you about later. I wanted to do a little polling here. How many of you have spent time here with your students? How many of you associate the museum with computer science? So we're going to change that perception tonight and going forward. This is a collections institution, 33 million specimens, artifacts, and objects, to be specific. It's a research institution. 200 scientists working in the fields of anthropology, vertebrate and invertebrate zoology, earth and planetary sciences, and the beloved paleontology. It's also a chief contributor to the general public understanding of science and dedicated to improving science education for your students and for all the students in our city and nationally. And we do that in a variety of ways. Be happy to give you more information about all of our programs and how they might apply to your work in many ways. Tonight you're going to see how the museum's work relies upon and pursues computer science tools and ways of thinking in order to achieve its mission. You will also hear about an exciting new program, but we also want to hear from you. We want to co-invent the best way for the museum to serve your needs and your students' needs, the youth of this city, to become proficient and perhaps to master computer science for science learning. And we have really exciting specific examples about that. So we are thrilled to be a part of this community and to join this community and to join your efforts to better the lives of the 1.1 million students who are part of our schools in our city. And I am delighted now to introduce Christina. Oh, and you can always email me with questions, rcohen@amnh.org. How do I spell my name? R-C-O-H-E-N, there you go. Christina Wallace has joined us as the director of BridgeUp STEM, a new program that the museum has inaugurated. She comes to us from the startup and tech community, and in addition to those gifts, is also a singer, a mountain climber, and a theater lover. So we love her. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks, Ruth. Hi guys, thanks so much for coming. We're so excited to have you. Just wanted to give a quick intro on what BridgeUp STEM is. It's a new program that we're just getting started in. This weekend is our big launch event. So we were given a $7.5 million grant from the Helen Gurley Brown Trust to focus on how to increase the diversity of the pipeline of talent that gets exposure to computer science. And particularly looking at getting more women into the field and getting more diverse and underserved students into that field. We'll get questions in a second. So we were given this grant just a few months ago. It's a 5-year grant, so we are at the very beginning of building a pretty interesting portfolio of programs. The big kind of cornerstone program of that portfolio will be a 2-year after-school intensive program for high school girls called the Brown Scholars. And it'll be 1 year of after-school coursework, followed by a year of research here with scientists in the museum. which is a pretty exciting hands-on way to apply computer science to some of the sciences and the science research we do here. We'll also have a middle school coding club looking at some of the underserved schools in the boroughs. We have a professional development piece of this, and this is where especially your feedback will be helpful, how we can create tools and offer professional development that will be useful as you think about bringing computer science into your classrooms. We'll have a post-baccalaureate fellowship for a few women to join us every year, a teaching and research fellowship. And then we have a public programming component, and that's really focused on how to get people to associate computer science with science and AM&H. And that's what we're kicking off this weekend with Hack the Universe. You have a little flyer about it. But the quick version is it starts Friday night where we invite You're coming? Excellent. It starts Friday night with about 100 professional hackers, astrophysicists, tech people, students, all of the above, who are building applications on computers, mobile, and in virtual reality for our digital universe data set. That's our astrophysics atlas, essentially. And you'll learn a little bit more about that from our next presentation. And they're going to work through the night here, actually right around the corner in the Hall of the Universe near the planetarium. They're staying up all night building something cool, and then on Saturday, as we open the museum to the public, we have some mini lectures, we have hands-on activities for students. That is all free and open, and we'd love to have you join us or tell your students about it. That's Saturday from 1 to 5. And then we finish Saturday night with presentations of what the hackers built over the previous 24 hours and a fun cocktail closing reception, which is also free, and we'd love to have you join us for that. So if you want more information on any of this, you can email bridgeup@amnh.org. You can add your name to the sign-up sheet, which was at the registration table. It'll still be there when you leave. Give us your email, or you can ask me for a card, and I'm happy to connect you that way. But we're so excited to have you here, and we really want to change that perception of computer science and AM&H to be one that makes sense. Question?
Yeah, given that your focus is entirely computer science, why do you refer to it as STEMs? Computer science is a small part of STEM. I think there's a lot of harm being done by talking about STEM when you mean, I don't mean you particularly, but the whole community. I think there's a lot of harm done by talking STEM, when we're really talking about computer science.
Well, in our case, it's computational science. So ours is computer science for science. We're looking at the application of Python and R, relational databases, all of those tools within the research of evolutionary biology, astrophysics, cultural anthropology, and the like. So at least get 2 of those letters, the S and the T. But we also are differentiating ourselves from another BridgeUp program that our funder supports at the New York Public Library. So it is part of what makes us us. Certainly we have the science and the technology, and I think there's certainly some engineering components when we think about circuitry and robotics and how those play into astrophysics and astronomy research. We'll find a way to get some bootstrap in there for mathematics. Don't you worry. Okay, next up. We're very excited to have them. We have Vivian Trakinski, who's the director of current science media program called Science Bulletins here, and she produced our current space show. If you've seen that, it's very cool. I encourage you to see it. And we also have her associate Andreas Wetteborn, who's the technical director for both of those projects. Come on up, and I'm going to try to figure out how to plug this in. Start talking while I do.
So I'll start talking.
Yes.
Has anybody here seen the space show? So one thing that people don't necessarily realize about the space show is that is 90 to 95%, I'd say, data visualization. Those aren't animations. They're not, graphic interpretations of ideas that we know about the universe. Those visuals are actually based on data that has been collected by a variety of instruments and turned into pictures that are hopefully beautiful, transportive, and communicative. And that's what data visualization is all about. So Andreas and I are going to show you a couple of pieces that we've worked on. Data visualization is a useful tool across all the natural sciences. We have been using it a lot for earth system science and astrophysics, so we're going to show you 2 examples of those.
Okay, you're mirrored.
and Andreas is going to drive.
Yeah.
But I do want to give a little bit of a pitch for enthusiasm for data visualization. We're living in a time where the evidence of science is largely based in these bits of information. And these data sets are so large that there's really no way to appreciate them or to understand them without visualizing them. So when Ruth mentioned that the collections here include 33 million objects, I'm pretty sure that doesn't include the huge amount of data that our scientists have collected in order to research things like evolution, astrophysics, climate science, and I'm sure a lot of other things. So it's a really exciting time. Computers are obviously essential to the collection of that data and to the interpretation of that data and the communication of that data. So I'm a producer, so my expertise is in, hopefully, the communication of these ideas and helping to create pieces that speak to all audiences. And Andreas is the computer nerd, whose background is, his master's is actually in science visualization. So he can talk to you. We're going to take a look at the pieces, talk a little bit about what we were trying to achieve in them, and then Andreas can talk about actually what it takes to produce something like that. So this is a visualization that played in our Hall of Planet Earth. We produced it a couple of years ago when there was some particularly interesting activity related to the Enso cycle. So the Enso cycle is comprised of El Nino and La Nina cycles. To illustrate this, we used sea surface temperature data. So you can see the data here represented as a variety of blues to red. We're trying to show the seasonal patterns of this data. In earth science systems, what's so interesting is that there's seasonal variations in just about everything. But then if you want to understand either climate patterns or climate change patterns, you have to look at years and years of data and larger patterns. So here we're setting up the story by talking about the normal variation of sea surface temperature. You'll see that the data is projected onto an Oppianus projection of the Earth. So Andreas will talk a little bit about that. And then it's wrapped onto a sphere. To make our transition to the Enso cycle, it's really not apparent in this data set, so we had to transition to a different data set, which is called anomaly data. There, scientists study not the absolute temperature of the sea surface, but the variation from average temperatures. There we chose a slightly different color variation, still reds and blues to make it intuitive, but we had to differentiate it from the data that you saw previously. These data, these are weekly data sets, whereas the previous data set was global data captured every single day. And now we're transitioning to infrared data, which represents the cloud patterns, to show some of the climate events that were triggered by El Nino and La Nina that year. So that's an example of how scientists are using satellite data to represent Earth system science and the interconnection of the ocean, land, and atmosphere. So how did we do that?
Yeah, so the data visualization starts with, of course, the data and the collection of the data. So this data was mostly collected from satellites. There are 2 satellites orbiting, so every day they measure sea temperature. But there are also samples from sea buoys, so they're actually taking water temperature measurements. And this is all fed into NOAA simulation, or like not simulation, but a process that collects all this data and makes it into a big image that covers the whole Earth. And that image we take as our raw data for our visualization. It's usually like grayscale values that just represent the temperature, and then we use those values to map them into color. In this case, red for warm colors and like blue for colder colors.
Yeah, and we should say this is an example of observed data. So we'll talk a little bit about simulation data later on. But there are hundreds of Earth orbiting satellites collecting data at every moment in time to create full data sets of the changes to the Earth over time, including land cover, atmospheric measurements, including things like ozone and also ocean temperatures in various ways, sea ice coverage. So really almost that's how scientists are making their climate models. So they're collecting data, observed data sets, looking at those systems over time, feeding what we understand about the interconnection of those systems, running the model forward, running it backwards to test it if it matches what we actually observed, and then correcting. So it's really, this looks like an animation of the Earth, but it's really a visualization of the actual data that is being collected in order to understand the climate system. So we also wanted to show you something that, a scene from the space show, which is very different. So the Dark Universe is about cosmology. So we really we travel through the entire universe for this show. And I don't know, does anybody recognize what this background map is? The CMB, the cosmic microwave background. So we have lots of data sets going on in this. The satellite that you saw at the beginning was an accurate model of the Planck satellite that collected the most recent data, or the highest resolution data for the cosmic microwave background, which is the oldest light in the universe. The blue and red variations in that map, they are magnified here. They're very, 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 very minute variations that tell us two different things. One, that the universe was almost completely consistent, and that inflation was very fast, which is why those variations are so small. Because if inflation was very slow, matter would have clumped more quickly. But there is some variation, and those variations map to the distribution of matter that we see today. You also saw a very highly detailed model of the Milky Way. We're flying out of the Milky Way here. And then we're also creating these spheres, which are annotated overlays, trying to describe the distances that we're flying as we fly out. And then every star and galaxy, they're galaxies at this point, that you see that we are flying through are accurately placed representations of galaxies that we have observed and mapped. And Andreas can tell you about that map.
Yes, so that map is part of a project running here at the museum called Untitled Universe that collects data from all over the world from scientists about galaxies, stars, and other planets.
And that's the data set that you can get your paws on if you want to hack it all night next weekend.
And you can also go to our website and download it, and you can navigate it with this software here. It's called Party View. And this is also the same. It's called Party View.
And actually there's a link to it on your sheet.
There's a link on the MNH website. So here, this is the same data as we used for the space show. It's just, here's presented in a real-time environment where you can navigate yourself, whereas the space show is a very highly curated flight path. So here we see home, which is our Milky Way, and it's not actually the Milky Way. It's just an image of how we think the Milky Way looks like, because no one has been that far out, so we can't actually know how it looks from the outside. But this is the best guess today. And if you fly further out, we see a collection of galaxies. All the dots you see are galaxies. These are part of the Tully cluster, or the Tully survey. And the colors you see there aren't the real colors. In this case, they represent the density of the galaxy clusters. So, for example, a warm color like red is a dense cluster, and a cooler color blue is like a dense, sparse part of the universe. And we fly further out, we can look at a different data set called 2MASS, which covers a bigger area. I think it's about 1 million galaxies that we have all charted and measured. But that only covers a small part of our known universe. So we have even further data. These are called the Sloan galaxies and the Sloan 2DF galaxies. And here we can really see the limitations in what we know today. All these empty areas are areas we have not charted yet, so we don't know actually what's there, but we can assume it looks similar. But we can also see we've actually charted a big part of our universe. And the furthest back we can see is the cosmic microwave background, which you also saw in the... So that becomes a horizon for how far back in time and space we can see. Yeah.
And then we just wanted to show you a really quick, before I assume there are probably some questions. We wanted to show you an example of a simulation that we produced for the show. So we can make beautiful visualizations of things that we have observed. So by observed, I don't mean that we see it well enough to take a picture of it and then put that up and say it's a visualization, but by observed, I mean we've collected measurements of some kind of energy, and then we have assigned values in the visible range to those energies to make a picture that we can see and appreciate. But scientists are also using visualization for simulations. So simulations are huge data sets that represent our best understanding of dynamic systems. You can have visualizations of how the brain works. You can have visualizations of how the Earth works. In this case, we made a visualization with collaborators at the Kavli Institute at Stanford of how the entire universe evolved. And we wanted to let the audience see something that is completely invisible to us, and that is dark matter. And this is what that looks like. So scientists have made these measurements based on the gravitational impact of dark matter. They can't see it any better than we can, but they see dynamics in the universe that don't make sense unless you put all this matter in there. They have the measurements from the cosmic microwave background that tell them about the distribution of that matter in the universe at the very dawn of time. So they can go from there to the observed distribution of matter today and the dynamics that we see in the universe, and they can create a simulation that tells us how we got from point A to point B 13.7 billion years later.
What is the data that we are
It's part of their research.
No, this is actually physics. So the light areas are actually where the visible matter resides. So what's interesting and informative about this visualization is that you'll notice that all the light areas are embedded in the larger nodules of dark matter, and that's because we depend on the gravitational impact of dark matter to hold those galaxy clusters together. There's a point in the show where we show you that if you take the dark matter away, galaxy clusters would fly apart. So science visualization is really, it's so essential not only for the communication of science to general audiences, though it certainly is useful for that, but it's essential to the analysis and the understanding and the meaning making of big data sets that scientists are working today, whether they're observed data sets or whether they're simulations that come out of the computers. Without them, it's just a bunch of numbers. And our brains are not capable of seeing the patterns in those numbers. So visualization is the way that we make meaning from those data sets.
We have time for some questions. If you'd like to ask them now.
So within the context of this being applied to a classroom, how are you playing around with ways that students can interact with it? I mean, in K-12 level.
Well, PartyView you can download in your classroom. So that is something that you can navigate. It is interesting. It's sort of, so where does the activity, is it about navigating the universe? Or is it about computer science and visualization.
I will say, this is what we're generating over the next couple of months. We're going to look at building scaffolding curriculum that will lead to students being able to put together what ultimately they see as a visualization and what those parts are. And then unpacking that even further to playing with the actual languages to produce images, because that's where it starts. Vivian talks about data visualization. It's something we've all done in programming and or can learn to do. This is just a really sophisticated version of it with massive amounts of data. So those are the kind of connections we want to make, and that's why we need to dialogue with you all.
This is to just get you excited about it.
I mean, I come from a school that's an art-based program, and I'm always like we're not a STEM school, we're a STEAM school, and I'm always being like, why VA, why VA? And this data, this visualization of data is beautiful. You know, this is the aid here. It just was a natural output of the beauty of data.
I totally agree with you, and it's also really exciting to me, not being an artist or a scientist, that this is a common language for artists and scientists. So the software packages that Andreas uses to visualize these data sets, there is often a translation of the data that comes in from the scientists. So usually they're not image-based. Often they're just code-based.
Yeah, they're
right?
big files of numbers usually. So,
but they can those software packages can talk to each other. So digital artists and scientists are working in the same language, and it's a great opportunity to create art that has very, very deep meaning and is very essential for our understanding of nature and our place in the universe.
I would encourage you to come to the demos on Saturday night in the hackathon. Some of the challenges that we have posed to the hackers are visualization challenges off of this data. How can you tell great stories with it? What stories can you tell? How can you interpret it in 2D, in 3D, in virtual reality, in mobile? And we've also posed some education challenges to them as well. Can you look forward and back in time using this on, for instance, a mobile app?
So where do you intersect with, because here in New York City, they got schools where the students get taught how to create video games, but also, where does this kind of stuff intersect with, say, you got this book come out like Interstellar? How do you tie all those things together so that when you get, these sort of very realistic cinematic experiences, but then connect it back to the science?
Ruth, can I pop that one to you? I think we're in the process of thinking about that, about how we have used visualization for the past. We really started seriously pumping out visualization for public consumption and a way to communicate our sciences in the late 90s. So that's when digital video became very prominent. That's when we rebuilt our planetarium to be a digital video-based system. So we've been focusing on the creation of beautiful data sets to communicate science. We are now focusing on the use of this language as a way, a door into studying computer science and other applications. So I think it's kind of new in our thinking.
I mean, one of the things we're excited about with the girls program is exposing them to both the more hard research side, if we're looking at, and you'll hear about this in a second from Julia's presentation, DNA and genome data and much more kind of hard coding research, but then also the slightly more visual and artistic visualization side, and getting them exposure to all pieces of that and helping them decide, where do I fit within this? Am I more of a creative visual learner who has an artistic bent and wants to understand how I can actually manipulate the data points from numbers to pictures? Or am I someone who wants to go into a lab and download really cool DNA sequences and figure out how to write some scripts that really parse them together quickly and elegantly and beautifully? So it is something that we are trying to figure out how that fits into. I don't think there's a continuum of all the programs out there with schools and what they're focused on and what we're focused on. I think we're just really excited about taking something that is uniquely AM&H and building a platform with a couple of different outreach opportunities to make sure that it gets into the public consumption for students. download it for free. If you go to the Digital Universe link on your page, you'll get the data set and the Party View software. There's also a giant PDF that walks you through all of the information about what you're seeing and what all the different buttons that you clicked on are, and then gives you all of the information on how to use that. And one of the challenges we posed to hackers this weekend is build a UX for Party View so it's not quite so clunky. So maybe you'll see an update to that out of this.
And just so you know, that data set is a compilation of many, many data sets collected by federal governments, private institutions, European agencies, but curated here.
Last question.
I just wanted to kind of go off of what you were saying. I think one of the really valid books for kids I teach in school, and it's the idea that like the visual book is really important, and that it gets kids really excited and understanding. I think it's really important to tease out the sort of factual and data part and make them understand, or not make them, but have them understand that. But I know from my experience teaching another visual computer science program, processing, to my 6th and 7th graders, that was what I realized was going to be the hook. And when they see these amazing things, then they become more interested in kind of exploring them and see what's behind the scenes. And I think that's a really great thing. That's why I love using simulations and data visualization and stuff. It's awesome. Great.
Quick comment, and we'll move on.
Are you going to use, is this for Python or for processing, or which language are you going to focus on?
Python is definitely one of the languages that we're going to use as a foundation for these projects.
Can I just put you on the spot and say, what do you consider a couple of the most important languages for, or useful languages for?
I use Python for most of my stuff because a lot of the software I use have you can write your own little scripts in them in Python, and it's fast and easy to do data manipulation without a lot of overhead. So Python is definitely the most useful for me.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Dr. Julia Zichello. She's a PhD in biological anthropology. She's the director of our Sackler lab and is part of our education program here, and is going to talk to you about the intersection of computer science and biology.
Thanks, Christina. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the intersection of biology and computer science, which some of you may already be aware of. But one of the things I want to do is just talk about what our scientists at the museum here do, and then how we've translated that into an educational context and work with some youth. And I'm also going to show some two open access data sets that you can easily download, and they're all on the sheet that you've been given. So I'll just talk a little bit about the theory behind those data sets and what we actually do with them. So yes, biologists love computer scientists, and this is becoming increasingly more important as our biological data gets bigger and bigger. And this comes a lot from the molecular biology world, so it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to sequence a whole genome. So we have whole genome data. The human genome is 3 billion base pairs, for example. So there's so much work that really computer scientists are doing to parse through all of that genomic data. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. So again, there's this nice intersection between biology and computer science, and it overlaps into this field called bioinformatics. And I think it's really important to think about educating our next generation of biologists in computer science and vice versa, because this connection is just becoming stronger and stronger. And one of the things, also another way of looking at this, it's like nerds needing other nerds, which I think is kind of a nice connection, right? So just opening that up a little bit, what is bioinformatics? So again, a lot of the data is coming from molecular biology, not just genome data, but transcriptome data, so all of the genes that are actually expressed in your body, which is more than you would just get from the 3 billion base pairs. Again, another reason why it's really important to use computer science when looking at a whole genome is because the 3 billion base pairs are not all sequenced in one go. It's oftentimes sequenced in small segments, and one segment is sometimes sequenced 100 times, so you have to align all of that and collapse it into one piece of data. So something we do here at the museum a lot is also the field of systematics, so understanding evolutionary relationships between species and using genetic data to infer that. There are two different types of data that we do use here. So one is genetic data and the other would be morphological data, which is sort of anatomical data. So those are the two things that I'm going to focus on. Again, inferring evolutionary relationships by using these two different types of data. So systematics is in red here, just to emphasize, this is one big focus of the biologists here at the museum, whether or not they're looking at groups of fish or amphibians or beetles. A lot of it is trying to figure out the evolutionary relationships between species. Another thing that's done often is GIS, so Geographic Information Systems, trying to figure out where species are located on the Earth. And this is a connection to conservation biology. So there's a lot of landscape biology going on where people are trying to understand where species are living, how their distributions may have changed over time. Another thing is 3D geometric morphometrics. So this is looking three-dimensionally at anatomical structures. So it's, again, three-dimensional data of anatomy, which can come from 3D scans or other ways of taking the data. So what kinds of questions can we answer or ask using computer science with these big data sets? So one, how biodiverse is the world? So there are people, there are scientists here at the museum, right now in all parts of the world, trying to figure out how many different species we have in different parts of the world. Another thing, again, is how are they related evolutionarily? So this is not an easy question to answer. Depending on the type of data you have and how you analyze it, you can get a different answer. So this is why, again, there's a great need for computer scientists to link up with these big data sets. Again, how do species form? So really the deep evolutionary history of how these species form, how do we have so many different species on Earth? And then again, how are species spatially distributed? So this gets to the GIS data. And so the next thing I'm going to show, so these are two evolutionary trees. One is derived from morphological data. So tree A is from morphological data and tree B is from genetic data. And these two trees are different. So that's one thing to see. So this is why it's important for scientists to look at both types of data to build these evolutionary trees. Can anyone think of another reason why at the museum would be interested in building a tree using morphology and we would not use genetics at all? Any ideas? Yeah, paleontology, exactly. So we don't have genetics for all species, and we just have fossil evidence, and so that's where we really need to use the anatomical data to build these evolutionary trees. So how do we get this data? So again, a lot of scientists are collecting data, but what's really wonderful about genetics is that there's this open access database called GenBank, where every single person who publishes a genetic paper has to submit their genetic sequences onto GenBank. So it's a public database, and anyone can go on it and download anything they want. So again, that's on your paper there, and you can download genetic data on any species you'd like, including a lot of human data. So what does the data look like from GenBank? So this is just an example of me clicking on a particular species of bird just to show you what the data look like. So there's a general format called FASTA format that genetic data is often put into, and this can be loaded into a lot of software for analysis. So this is a FASTA format file you see, and again, it's just, obviously strings of A, C's, G's, and T's. A way to analyze that from a computer programming perspective, so there were a lot of people using Perl because it was identifying strings of data, but now we're shifted over into using Python, so there are a lot of people using Python to analyze this data, including writing a script to download sequences, so you don't have to manually go into GenBank and download the sequences. So what do we do with these sequences once we download them? Well, there's this really wonderful website called DNA Subway, which is developed from the people out at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. And this is something that can be used in the classroom that we've used in our classes before. So it's called DNA Subway, so it has this nice, fun interface. But really what it is, it's taking you through the steps of downloading genetic data from that database I just showed, and then taking that data, aligning it, and building an evolutionary tree. And students, obviously can work with it, and it's sort of fun looking. So this is just an example of sort of the pipeline of DNA Subway. So downloading the sequences from GenBank, aligning them, which again, you click on any one of these little nodes to get to the next step. So that last step where it says analyze sequences, there's a program called Muscle that's in there, and that's what's going to align all of our sequences together. And then the last step is building an evolutionary tree from that. So this is what the alignment looks like. And this is, again, just showing the parts of the sequence that are different between individuals. So this data, again, is bird data from starlings, and where you see the C's is where different individuals, they differ from a general sequence. So then, again, the next part is to build this evolutionary tree. So students, again, can do this, and it's really sort of well laid out in this program of visualizing this evolutionary tree. So where does that leave us? Well, this Sturnus vulgaris data that I just showed you is not a whole genome. It was just a small piece of genetic data. So why do we need to use whole genomes to infer evolutionary relationships between species? Why do we have all of this big data in biology? Well, one of the reasons, just briefly, is that individual genes sometimes have their own evolutionary agenda. So sometimes if you just use one gene, it will not give you the correct evolutionary tree. So the more data, the better to infer evolutionary relationships of the whole species. So you can see one of the trees showing humans and chimps more closely related, so that's the correct evolutionary tree. The other one, each one of these dots represents a gene. The other one is showing you, that some of these genes are giving us a different signal. So sometimes if you just take a small piece of the genome and use it to build a tree, it's not going to give you the right tree. That's why the most sort of statistically robust way to do it is to collect a whole genome. Okay, so what about morphology? So how do we use morphology to build these evolutionary trees? So there's a database called Morphobank that was developed by some people out at Stony Brook and also in conjunction with scientists here at the museum. So we're now in the process of thinking about how to streamline Morphobank in a way similar to what I just showed you for DNA Subway, so it can be used in classrooms. One of the other things, though, that we're doing, one of the other things that you can do is just go onto this website and download the data. So what do these data look like? So the way they score the morphological data a lot of times is looking for presence or absence of traits. So it's a binary system of zeros and ones. So you should feel good about that, right, as computer scientists. So again, this is just showing some of the anatomy that was scored for this. This is a bat skull. These are the front teeth of a bat skull. And these traits are scored again, and the more data, the better, also to build evolutionary trees. The same thing with the morphological data. And Morphobank does not have something embedded in it to build a tree the way the DNA Subway does. But one thing that we've used before is another program called Mesquite, which is a free program that you can also download. and you would download your data from Nexus and put it into Mesquite to build an evolutionary tree. So we did use Morphobank in one of our programs here with youth, and this is the tree that they built from the data. So I just want to give one last plug for R. So again, all the scientists are using R here. While it's not formally a programming language, it is something where there are many, many people developing external packages for R to build evolutionary trees, to analyze morphological data and genetic data as well. So, I think it's really relevant to teaching students not only statistics, but, fluency in this program if they're interested in being biologists or computer scientists or both. Thank you.
Has all this been used in schools? Did you say that? Or?
Not as in our programs here. Yeah. So we've used Morphobank and we've used DNA Subway in our programs here. And again, Morphobank needs a little more external support from the educator because it's not set up. But DNA Subway was created specifically for use in classrooms.
My guess is, based on a whole lot of developmental psychology that I've read, huge studies, 40-year studies, that the astrophysics side of it will interest virtually only boys, and this side of it will attract far more girls. Have you experienced it?
I don't know that we've experienced that yet. Difference in, not really. But.
Well, I can point you to the developmental psychology research if you're interested. My prediction is this will attract very many girls. The astrophysics will attract almost only boys.
I will say for our astrophysics hackathon this weekend, we had 50% submissions from women.
Yeah.
So we will have equal gender representation at our hackathon, if that's any help.
Yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit about, I come from a K of 5 population, I shared this with Ruth earlier, and I know much of the conversation around coding and computer science is targeted towards 6 to 8 and onward. We are, however, trying to bring that conversation a little further down, perhaps grades 4 or 5. So can you talk to me a little bit about the thought in terms of reaching that particular population?
It's not particularly part of our grant. We really are focused on middle school and higher. Part of it is just a block and tackling, right? We're trying to get more of them into careers, which means more of them into college. We need more of them coming out of high school prepared for that. I can say that there does seem to be, a big push around computational thinking, earlier stages, right, in early 4th and 5th grade, and experiencing that both hands-on, whether it's like a robotics program. We have a pretty robust Adventures in Science Lego robotics program at that age level here, or whether it's things within engineering, like it's not little bits. It's the other one that was.
Well, also,
commercial.
Scratch and scalable game design are used at those ages quite successfully.
Right.
And those are free, Scratch is.
And Scratch now has a data set where you can see your data set in Scratch now. And so, yeah.
And I think CSNYC does Scratch workshops if they're available in the organizations around the city.
Yeah. We're familiar with CSNYC. In terms of the scalable game design, that's some work that we're looking to actually, we're almost finished downloading the software so that we can start.
Nice.
But again, just in terms of having that conversation, being very relevant at the elementary stage, because if we're thinking about getting our children ready for college and career readiness, then or prepared, then we've got to start as early as possible. And so I definitely am looking towards bringing that conversation down to, the lower grades.
Sure. There are a couple of, we've had a couple of card games actually sent to the museum, to the education department. One is focused on turtles, that I think is meant for 1st and 2nd graders. That obviously they're not in front of a computer terminal, they're not writing lines of code, but it's a way to help them think about algorithmic and computational thinking. Right. And it's a game that they can play. You have an adult that facilitates, but they have actual cards and they think about how to sequence them, how to think maybe slightly more abstract good argument to put a kid in front of a screen at that age, at least first and second grade, when really the focus is much more around how can you teach them to think abstractly, algorithmically.
Precisely. So you'll tell us a little bit more about those cards.
Sure. If you give me a card, or I can give you mine, I can certainly email you. I don't have the name of the programs off the top of my head, but they're in my office.
All right, thank you.
On that same topic, for kids being able to collect data, you've been doing anything on that, but that's what I do with elementary school. So you can collect heartbeats, and you can collect, there's a lot of data that you can collect and then use it, and not have to worry about these big databases, just to make it more hands-on and real. But I didn't know, in all of what you're doing, and this is obviously huge, any of the Sackler programs you're using where kids are creating, sort of collecting their own data and then analyzing?
Yeah, so we're thinking a lot about that for BridgeUp, the curriculum that we're developing now. I think that adds obviously another layer of meaning to the data, and the students can connect with it more. But for the Morphobank that I showed you, the program that we ran for Morphobank, the students did collect their own data. They were going throughout the museum though, and using our exhibits to collect data on whether or not these traits were present or absent. And so then we created a little module within Morphobank to do that. And so that's some of the thinking of what we're thinking about going forward, of how to make that modular, like for classrooms that are external from the museum.
Also, for students collecting their own data, there's Project NOAA, where they use a smartphone and then they take a picture of species that they see, and then they build a database of where the species are distributed, and other schools contribute, and it's a really neat way to see, like, especially for birds and many different species.